Hey folks, David Stewart here. Let's talk a little bit about Bitcoin and crypto. The problem with cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin. There's a whole bunch of them. There's a million different coins. I'm going to mostly focus on Bitcoin because that's kind of the hot thing to talk about right now. But I think this applies for all the other currencies, and the fact that there are all these other currencies actually play into some of my arguments here regarding the problem with crypto. So the first big problem with crypto and why it's so hot is that it's unstable. That is to say, the value is not very constant at all. So you have Bitcoin go up to 50,000 and like down to 30,000 within a couple days. That means that Bitcoin can't really be what a lot of people imagined it to be. I've known about Bitcoin for over 10 years at this point, and a lot of people in my circles, more liberty-minded people, were very big on Bitcoin because they saw Bitcoin as a solution to a bunch of problems that fiat currency creates. And so the problems with fiat currency are many, many, many problems. But one of the biggest ones is that you print money. It is a constant state of inflation based on what the state wants to do with the money. So the state's in charge of the money, the state can print money. Now the problem with trying to view Bitcoin as a currency is that, first of all, it is valued too high, but it's valued in a very unstable way. The fact that any kind of asset could lose 30% of its value within a couple of days means that it is far too unstable to be a unit of record, meaning you're thinking of things in terms of Bitcoin. Nobody is really going down to the store and picking up a bunch of things off the shelf and going like, that's 1/10,000th of a Bitcoin. No, they think of it in terms of dollars, because dollars, even with all the things that the state does with the US dollar, it's a way more stable currency than Bitcoin would be, given how Bitcoin is trading for dollars. Unless you believe that somehow the economy lost 30% of its dollars within a couple of days, which didn't happen. So Bitcoin was not the stable one and everything else was unstable, because everything's like stable in terms of dollars, and then Bitcoin is the one that's going crazy. It has to do with the way Bitcoin is trading. People are trading it as a speculative asset. They're not looking to use it as currency. And that's really why that's the big reason why Bitcoin has failed, is that it can't be a currency if people are trying to roll the dice and trying to buy in and out of it as if it's a speculative asset, as if it's a hot stock that's going up and down and is trading in value based on just the demand for people to buy it and the demand for people to sell it. So it can't really be a store of value if it's worth something different on Monday than it is on Friday. Can't really be a unit of record if it's not stable at all. It's very hard, even though it's basically infinitely divisible. You're not really going to be thinking in terms of, this is 1/10,000th of a Bitcoin. This is like 1/100th of a Satoshi or something for like a couple of bars of candy. The second one is people say it's an inflation hedge. This is not the case at all. Bitcoin is not a hedge against inflation. A hedge against inflation is when you buy something thinking that the value of it will be very similar in the future to what it is now in terms of converting it to other goods. So if you buy, a gold coin for $1,000, and there's $1,000 worth of goods that you can buy today, and you have this idea of this many goods. And in the future, because of inflation, you sell the coin for an increased amount of US dollars, and it buys roughly the same quantity of goods. Well, that's a hedge against inflation. Bonds are a hedge against inflation. They pay interest in the future that will hopefully overcome most, if not all, of the inflation that has occurred between when you buy the bond and when you sell the bond. That's a hedge against inflation. You're trying to keep the value of the currency, not have it go up. So when people are like, how could it not be a hedge against inflation? It went up 10,000%. That's a speculative asset, not a hedge against inflation. So you're playing you're playing a gambling game, not trying to hedge against inflation to maintain the value of your money. And as I already mentioned, the value is unstable. So trying to hedge against inflation with a completely unstable value that can lose or gain 30% of its value within a couple of days is not something that you want. Keep in mind, during that 30% drop, people were selling. And I think it was because a lot of people thought the game was up. And when you know the game's up, you're trying to liquidate your positions as quickly as possible and get into the more stable US dollars. The whole point is to get more US dollars, not to get more Bitcoin, or, to get your US dollars, which you'll, then trade for whatever other currency that you want to buy in some target location. The third problem is really a practical problem. And this applies to all cryptocurrencies, virtually all of the classic ones that I know of, which is that they're not physical. So a gold coin is physical. A silver coin is physical. A US dollar has a physical component, even though most dollars are actually imaginary. I think like 9/10 of the currency at least is actually deposits, which means that it's basically imaginary money. It's you have a multiplying of the traded money supply through the banking system, what happens between banks. That's not actually based on some amount of printed currency, but you do have printed dollars. So like the other day in my neighborhood, somebody, not in my neighborhood, but basically the entire like western part of California had no internet because somebody crashed their car into a fiber optic line and the Comcast backbone went down, and basically everybody was picking off that backbone, which meant no one could access the internet. You couldn't even access the internet with your phone. It was like an internet-free world for a couple of days, and it was actually very nice. I'll talk about that in another video. But anyway, while that internet's down, I couldn't. What can I do with a Bitcoin? How am I going to pay somebody for a service? If I really needed to, I could get US dollars out, or I couldn't get it out of an ATM because the ATMs would be down because maybe the network's down, unless they're using they may be using another telecommunication service. So, but Bitcoin relies on the internet infrastructure, which as a whole is very robust, but for you as an individual to be able to access to that is actually not that robust. A dude crashed his car, all of a sudden nobody has the internet, nobody would have been able to use Bitcoin as a currency, even if people were using it as a currency, or any other currency, like a more stable one like Ethereum or something like that. None of us would have been able to use our cryptocurrency because we didn't have the internet, but we could still trade silver, we could still trade our dollars, we could still trade physical things. So because there's no physical part of it, that basically means you're dependent upon a system which may be robust in total, but is actually fragile when it comes down to each individual person. If the lights are off, if the power goes off, which we get rolling blackouts here in California, it's because it's going to be fire season. Can't use the digital currency. You're kind of out of luck, which puts a damper on things. You can still run your business if the power's out by taking US dollars, though. Number 4 is that cheap money drives out dear money. This is an old economic saying, but basically, farmers of yore could pay their taxes in tobacco or dollars, so they paid it in tobacco, because it was easier and cheaper to have the tobacco, and the dollars were more precious and more difficult to come by. So nobody is paying for anything in Bitcoin when they look at Bitcoin and they're like, I want to hold Bitcoin because the value is going up and up and up. They view it as dear money. It's not really money at all because of the volatility involved, but cheap money drives out dear money. You're going to do everything you can in US dollars because they're less valuable than any kind of cryptocurrency. At least, they're not less valuable than any kind of cryptocurrency, but they're less valuable than Bitcoin. So nobody's using it as a medium of exchange. Nobody is buying or selling things in Bitcoin for the most part. If they do, there's usually people are figuring out the value in how much Bitcoin by referring to the dollar. It's still the dollar that's the unit of record. It's still the dollar that's the unit of account is still the US dollar, and that's how you're going to figure out how much Bitcoin you may actually exchange. But most people don't want to get rid of their Bitcoin, sort of, because I'll get to that in a minute. Number 5 is that other crypto rides the waves, but there are way too many standards. So this is the other problem. People prefer few standards to many standards. This is just a general rule. So one of the reasons that bimetallism tended to be the dominant form of money for thousands of years is that it really comes down to 2 standards, gold and silver. And you could try to bring another metal into that, but at that point, people would be like, it's more stable to just think of things in terms of silver. Everyone would just want silver because they know other people value silver. It becomes the standard. So people really prefer one standard. You don't want to have to travel around to 50 different counties and everybody uses a different metal to trade with or a different currency. You want as many people to have one currency as possible. That's one of the driving forces behind the euro, is that there's one currency that everybody's doing their accounting in, everybody's doing their trading in, everybody's doing their loaning in, everybody's doing all their contracts and futures in the euro. That was one of the things that people wanted to do with the euro rather than have all of these other little local currencies. People really do prefer, and I think people who on this channel have argued why you want the euro for that reason. They're correct. People prefer fewer standards to many standards. That's why we have iOS and Android, and every third phone standard has basically failed because people are already plugged into those. They want to know that if they buy another phone, that all their other software, they can just download it and use it on the new phone. They want a few standards. So currencies are a kind of standard, and there's too many cryptocurrencies. Am I going to trade in Dogecoin today? Is Dogecoin going to be the currency, or is it we're going to have 30 different currencies all floating against each other, and we're all going to trade with them, and we're all going to have to try to figure out how many Dogecoin I want for this work? You want to hire me to do a book cover for you, and you're going to pay me 10 Dogecoin, but I don't have to stop and think. Again, we have to go back to the US dollar, the actual standard, to figure out what we actually want to trade with those cryptocurrencies. And the only reason we want to trade them is because we view them as having speculative value. It's like paying somebody stock at this point. It's like, how about you do this work for me and I'll pay you 1 share of Apple stock. Okay, how much is Apple stock worth? Is it worth what I want to charge, which is $200? Okay, it's worth that. Yeah, we can change. Again, I have to go back to the US dollar, the actual standard. So there's too many cryptos for it to supplant any kind of really large-scale currency like the US dollar at this point, because not one of them has become the standard. Now, Bitcoin could have become the standard, but instead it became basically a trading bonanza, and it's not really going to be a digital like a digital currency that will supplant the dollar. I could see maybe another one will be that can produce a little bit more stability over the long term. I think I don't know. You guys can tell me which ones you think will be like the stable coin of the future. So the sixth one is that it'll simply be banned from ownership if it ever starts to become a real threat to fiat. This is one of the predictions I made for 2020 is like Bitcoin would be banned. It's not now. I might revise that and say it may not be banned, but the state will definitely take an interest in what people are doing with Bitcoin and try to retrieve the value out of Bitcoin trading, at least try to tax it, maybe retroactively tax it in a variety of different ways. But if it were to ever become an actual threat to fiat, you can bet that it'll be banned. And people who say, "Oh, it can't be banned," you're incorrect. Gold was banned. A lot of people don't realize that you couldn't own gold. You couldn't just own gold bullion for decades. They made it illegal to own gold bullion and basically made it so you had to sell your gold bullion to the U.S. Treasury in exchange for dollars. Why did they do this? Well, because then you basically got off the gold standard that way. Even though we didn't go off the gold standard until Nixon, we actually went off the gold standard as soon as gold was banned because you couldn't freely exchange dollars for gold at that point. There was no actual standard after that. So they'll simply ban it. Now, they can't come and get it. They don't know where it is. And like, oh God, they can't, I could secretly trade Bitcoin. Yeah, you can do all that. But all they have to do to make Bitcoin a completely worthless currency that no one wants is to say, if we find out you own Bitcoin, if we find out you have a wallet that has Bitcoin, then you're going to jail. And everyone will get rid of their Bitcoin because they don't want to go to jail. Or you can sell it to the U.S. government for this amount, or you can go to jail. If we ever find out you have it, you go to jail. Now, that's all it would take for any reasonable person to do it because the risk is not worth the reward. Why would I hold Bitcoin, which no one will want because they'll go to jail if they get it? Why would I want to hold on to that and pay somebody with it? Every time I want to use it, it's a risk. It's like trading heroin at that point. Why would you do that? If the government said, hey, we're making heroin illegal, you can't trade it with people anymore and sell it, you'd be like, well, or you can sell it to us. Like, here's your heroin. I got to get out of that because that's a risk if heroin were legal in this little situation we're imagining here. So yeah, it could simply be banned, it'll simply be banned from ownership if it ever becomes an actual threat to fiat. If it looks like everybody's actually going to start banking in some cryptocurrency, whatever it's going to be, then the U.S. government will get rid of that. And China's already been cracking down. So I can see a lot more of that from the big global governments, the big hegemonic governments like China, the United States, European Union in the future, maybe even Russia. So anyway, that's another one there. Number 7 is you're basically asking Bitcoin, and this is part of, I was part of this too. We were just imagining Bitcoin was going to be something that it really wasn't designed to be. Is that we were hoping that it would be something that would basically be a currency, a complete currency to replace the dollar. That it would get rid of all the problems of banking, get rid of the problems of central banking, get rid of the problems of the Fed, that it would be the new money, and that the government wouldn't be able to touch it or control it. Truth is, that's not really even what Bitcoin was designed to do. Bitcoin was designed to be a non-centralized digital transfer, so that you could transfer it without the need of some sort of centralized, overarching government or network controlling it. That it could be a non-centralized way to transfer, comparative value. And eventually you get the value by trading US dollars for it. And even 10 years ago, people who basically figured it out for me, because I didn't do any of the math, it cost more money to make a Bitcoin than it did to just buy one for US dollars. So if you wanted to use a Bitcoin for online transactions, and 10 years ago, the only thing people used it for was for buying drugs on Silk Road or buying Hitman or something like that with Bitcoin. So they didn't really use it. It really started, more than maybe 10 or 11 years ago, but starting up like 8-9 years ago, they're like, yeah, restaurants started accepting Bitcoin, but it was cheaper to just buy the Bitcoin with dollars. And if that's the case, why would you buy the Bitcoin? Well, you buy the Bitcoin so that you can send it to someone online in a non-centralized fashion. And if to that task, it would do it very well if people weren't doing a giant value trading Ponzi scheme with it, which is I'll get to in a minute. But it's not designed to be a backdoor currency for those sorts of to replace the dollar and eliminate banks and that sort of stuff. The reality is that banks actually provide a lot of services that people like in the economy. Debt is something that people really like to have access to for a variety of reasons we don't need to get into in this particular video. But like a zero, a full reserve banking system, or, how do you create Bitcoin reserve? It becomes a whole mess because Bitcoin wasn't designed to replace the dollar. I don't believe it was. And asking it to replace the dollar is just asking it to do something it wasn't designed to do. So the next one is number 8. It's a Ponzi scheme. Now, it's not a Ponzi scheme by design from the get-go, but it's a Ponzi scheme definitely now. And the way a Ponzi scheme works is that it relies on the new entries into the scheme to create value for the early adopters. So the people who come out on top of a Ponzi scheme are the people who are first in, and the people who are therefore also the first out. They're the ones who do well. So if you bought a Bitcoin for $1, I don't know if you could ever buy it for $1, but let's say you bought it for $1 like in 2009 or something, I don't know. And then you sold it for 10, you did great. Why could you sell it for 10? Well, because just people wanted to buy more Bitcoin. People wanted to buy into Bitcoin. Why are people wanting to buy Bitcoin now? People are going to say a lot of shit, but the reality is they want to buy it because they think the value in dollars is going to go up. It is a speculative investment. And because of that, how do we know that it's worth $50,000? Somebody's willing to sell a Bitcoin for $50,000 of one Bitcoin. So if somebody's willing to sell a Bitcoin for $50,000, obviously they think $50,000 is worth more than the Bitcoin. They're the people who are actually going to be coming out on top of this. And as more people start to say, I think it's time for me to exit this scheme, you get a big value plummet like you've had. And you've had this Bitcoin kind of crashes several times as people think that the game is up and they very quickly move to liquidate their. Even at 35,000, if you bought in anywhere before that, you're like, now might still be a time to get out of this scheme before I lose my ass or something like that. Because if it ends up crashing below what you paid for it, and I know people were losing their butts on GameStop stock, losing their butts on Bitcoin, this kind of stuff. It basically, the value of Bitcoin is based on more people wanting to enter into Bitcoin. And the people who have previously bought Bitcoin holding on to it long enough to where they think they can exit the scheme, because it's not like Bitcoin is doing anything. It's not like a stock that makes a product. It's not like there's a future use for Bitcoin. It's just that you're trying to buy into Bitcoin and hope it goes up. And the more it goes up, the more you get suckers who think like, oh well, it's a low risk investment. I can buy Bitcoin, and because it went up so much, then it's going to keep going up forever. And then it turns around and loses 30% of its value. And you're like, what happened? Well, the people who bought in before you decided they needed to exit the Ponzi scheme, and so they left it. So it kind of evolved into this Ponzi scheme. All the value of Bitcoin is dependent upon new people entering in and trying to buy Bitcoin. Why are they trying to buy Bitcoin? Because they think it's going to be worth more US dollars in the future. That's why they're buying Bitcoin. They're not buying Bitcoin for any of the other reasons that Bitcoin exists. Nobody cares about that at this point. And then number 9 really why Bitcoin has failed, and the problem with crypto in general is that the adoption rate is zero. The adoption rate as a currency is zero. Nobody is doing business in Bitcoin. Nobody is trading Bitcoin futures. Nobody is saying, okay, I'm going to accept Bitcoin in the future for work I'm going to do now. And the other person's like, why would I do that? Why would I make a contract to pay you in the future for Bitcoin when it's maybe worth twice as much next week than it is this week in terms of no, we're going to do it in dollars. So nobody's making contracts where the liabilities are in Bitcoin, which means it just hasn't been adoption. So the adoption rate, if you're being really generous, it's like probably 0.01%. Like no one's using Bitcoin as a currency at all. People are merely trading it, trying to gain value in terms of US dollars or euros or whatever their local currency happens to be, whatever currency they can actually buy stuff with, whatever currency people tend to think of, whatever currency that people are going to accept tomorrow in exchange for payment. So that's the problems with crypto. That's the problems with Bitcoin. No one's using it as a currency. People are just trading it. Basically, the giant trades end up being a huge Ponzi scheme. I still have like a little bit of Bitcoin sitting around. I should probably sell it at some point. I don't even know how much it is. It's not that much because I didn't have that much to begin with, but I've just held it for years because I didn't care about it. I don't view it as like part of an investment portfolio because what do you want it there? Is it a speculative investment? Well, maybe other things are better investments. It could crash to like some abysmally low number. You never know because Bitcoin hasn't been around long enough, or any of these cryptocurrencies haven't been around long enough for people to really understand their value over the long term or what exactly people are going to be using them for in the long term. And maybe they crash down to a really low level and then we can start using it as a currency, like what we wanted to use Bitcoin for 10 years ago. Maybe if it gets devalued enough and everybody exits the Ponzi scheme, you can start using it again. But chances are this is the volatility of it will have poisoned Bitcoin's use as a currency probably forever. Maybe another one will be able to replace it, Ethereum or something else. I don't know which one it may be, but maybe you have some ideas there. One standard will have to prevail if there's going to be any kind of threat to that. And my fear or my strong belief is that if it's ever a threat to fiat currency, it'll simply be banned. So anyway, guys, thanks so much. Leave me your thoughts down below, and I'll see you guys next time.